Welcome. It is Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz. Ben Ferguson with you. Senator, I got to say, you're winning. I thought I was winning, hanging out in New York City, fighting the commies on TV. Meanwhile, I look over and you're sipping tea with the King of England. I thought you were part of the No Kings rally. I thought that was like you were going to boo and sit down and, oh, wait, no, that was the Democrats. But they did stand. They had no problem clapping for the King that they said they were having a No Kings rally. You can't make it up.
Well, God save the King. The King of England, the Queen of England are in America. They're in Washington, D.C. The King came to address a joint session of Congress. He's only the second British monarch to ever address a joint session of Congress, the first being his mother, Queen Elizabeth, in 1991, and he's now the second. He gave
And to clarify, you're old, Senator, but you're not that old. You were not there for the one in 91, right?
I most definitely was not. I was in college at the time, and to be honest, I don't remember.
70% of your colleagues were probably there. If we're doing the math, right?
Not quite 70, but there are some that were. Look, Joe Biden was elected in 1972, so that
there you go.
He had already been in Congress 20 years at that point.
That's so funny.
So look, the King was here. It was an important visit. We're going to break it down. I had a chance to meet the King, meet the Queen yesterday. I'm going to tell you about that. I'm going to tell you about the speech. We're also going to talk about the FBI this week raided 22 different establishments in Minnesota that are suspected of fraud, suspected of being part of this massive Somali fraud. We're going to break down the facts of what's happened with that. I'm very glad the Department of Justice is going after this, going after it aggressively. There needs to be real accountability. All that on today's pod.
Yeah, it really is incredible. Also, I want to tell you about some really cool things that have changed when it comes to your retirement, your 401ks. And for many Americans, they're excited because now you can invest in Bitcoin, in cryptocurrency. And Bitcoin IRA can help you navigate all of it. I got to ask you a question. Can you buy real Bitcoin in your retirement account? Well, if not, it's time to upgrade to Bitcoin IRA. It's 2026, and cryptocurrency is where so many investors are going and diversifying. You can buy and sell Bitcoin inside a tax-advantaged IRA with Bitcoin IRA, and that gives you more ways to diversify and grow your retirement savings. Security is their number one priority, and your assets are protected by military-grade multi-key security. And you're covered up to $250 million in digital asset insurance. So what are you waiting for? Get in the Bitcoin game today and diversify your portfolio. You'll actually talk to a real person. 866-679-6871. 866-679-7871 or BitcoinIRA.com/Ben. That's BitcoinIRA.com/Ben to open a free account and earn up to $1,000 bonus right now. All right, so Senator, on a normal week, it's like you fly up to D.C., you have meetings, you might meet with the president, you might have a meeting even in the Oval Office, you might announce legislation or have a big signing, and that's an exciting week. But how different was your schedule this week when you're like, oh, wait, the King of England's coming over, and there's a lot of things that Congress was heavily involved in, including him addressing a joint session of Congress, and I'll say it again, where Democrats had said no kings and had no kings rallies, had no problem giving him a standing ovation. I thought that was a little funny.
Well, on Monday, I flew back to D.C. early because I was invited to go to a garden party at the British ambassador's residence, and the garden party included the King and Queen, and so I said, all right, this will be fun to go. And I ended up inviting my daughter, Caroline. Caroline is 18. She turned 18 just a couple of weeks ago. Ben, you know Caroline well. There is almost no invitation at this stage in life that Dad can make that my teenage daughter is particularly interested in going to, except this. And Caroline, I'm like, hey, do you want to come to a garden party with the King of England? And she's like, yeah. And so Caroline came up, got a chance to visit with the Queen. The Queen was delightful. I introduced Caroline to the Queen. They shook hands. They talked for a few minutes, and then I introduced Caroline to the King. And he was actually quite charming, and they had a conversation that ended up being captured online and going viral. But he asked her if she was having exams right now, and she's got exams coming up in a week. She said, yeah, and then he made a joke. He said, he said, well, if you fail, you can blame me, which I thought was really funny.
That's a good out. That's a very good out. All right, I got to say, there's certain things you get to do in your career. Taking your daughter to meet the king, like you got to use that as a little political capital down the road when she thinks you're not cool again.
Look, earning dad brownie points is not easy to do, but that was really fun, and I enjoyed the chance to have her meet the king.
What a great +1, by the way.
Yeah, like it's very, very, very cool to bring your daughter, and then
how much trouble are you in though? And hold on, how much trouble are you in at home there? Like Heidi didn't get the invite, so she was all on board with this.
Heidi did get the invite. Heidi had to work, so Heidi actually said no.
There you go. Okay,
and actually, Catherine got the invite too. And Catherine, it's interesting. My 18-year-old thought it was really cool. My 15-year-old was like, no, I'm kind of busy. That's all right. And so Catherine said no. So she didn't come.
That's amazing. So it was a family affair, and it turned into a daddy-daughter date. I love it.
It was a daddy-daughter day. It was awesome. It was a lot of fun. The king's coming was important and consequential. And I actually think President Trump, they had an arrival ceremony at the White House where the president greeted the king. And the president laid out a little bit of why it was important for the king to be here and how this is really one of the beginning moments of 250, of our celebration of our nation's 250th anniversary. Give a listen to President Trump explaining why this visit right now is consequential.
Here in the shadows of monuments to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, honoring the British king might seem an ironic beginning to our celebration of 250 years of American independence, but in fact, no tribute could be more appropriate. Long before Americans had a nation or a constitution, we first had a culture, a character, and a creed. Before we ever proclaimed our independence, Americans carried within us the rarest of gifts, moral courage, and it came from a small but mighty kingdom from across the sea. For nearly 2 centuries before the Revolution, this land was settled and forged by men, women, who bore in their souls the blood and noble spirit of the British. Here on a wild and untamed continent, they set loose the ancient English love of liberty and the Great Britain's distinctive sense of glory, destiny, and pride. And that's what it is, glory, destiny, and pride. The American patriots who pledged their lives to independence in 1776 were the heirs to this majestic inheritance. Their veins ran with Anglo-Saxon courage, their hearts beat with an English faith in standing firm for what is right, good, and true. In recent years, we've often heard it said that America is merely an idea, but the cause of freedom did not simply appear as an intellectual invention of 1776. The American founding was the culmination of hundreds of years of thought, struggle, sweat, blood, and sacrifice on both sides of the Atlantic. Fate drew a long arc from the meadow at Runnymede to the streets of Philadelphia that ran through the lives of people born and bred on the British code that no man should be denied either justice or right. American patriots today can sing "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty," only because our colonial ancestors first sang, "God save the King."
You know, I got to say, one of the things that was really interesting about watching the president and interacting with the king and the queen is that right now there have been politically tensions have been pretty high. I think everybody knows that with England, and there's been a lot of frustration there. Certainly, I'm one of those. I think they should have stepped up in a different way with what we're doing with Iran. But the president also understood, and I thought it was incredibly not just classy, but also what leaders do, to say, hey, we don't always agree on everything, but we welcome you. We're going to roll out the red carpet, and we're going to have grand conversations that hopefully will make things even better moving forward. And just listening to him talk there, I think he did a phenomenal job with his speeches.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think the president's remarks were really well written. They were well delivered. They were important. There is no doubt the special relationship, which is the term that has been used for a long, long time to describe the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, it's strained right now. The UK's decision not to help us in Iran and, in fact, to block us from using British military bases, that has put real strain on that relationship, and it's going to be real strain with consequences. But at the end of the day, that's a decision from Keir Starmer, the prime minister. That's not King Charles who made that decision. And I think the king was here to try to remind Americans and maybe remind the British as well of the centuries, and not just 250 years, but centuries before that of intertwined history. Yeah. And our rights and liberties, we didn't just invent the concepts of individual liberty and government that are reflected in the Declaration of Independence 250 years ago, that are reflected in the Constitution. Many of those ideas originated in England. The Magna Carta was critical. The English Bill of Rights was critical. Great thinkers like John Locke, who laid out the reasoning behind the natural rights of life, liberty, and property that became the foundation for much of the American experience. And in fact, King Charles, when he was addressing Congress, I think he did something very eloquent and elegant in that he said, look, there's tension right now between our two nations. But he said, we've always had tension. And he said, when we started, in fact, 250 years ago, we had tension that resulted in a war. But it was interesting.
There was a lot of tension.
Yeah. He made a point. He said the principles that animated the American Revolution, and in particular, he singled out taxation without representation. He said those were principles that we had developed and that were integral to us. Now, we disagreed, meaning we, the British, disagreed on whether they applied to the colonies. But literally the grounds upon which we declared independence were grounds that were integral to the British constitutional history and understanding of rights. And in fact, when the Supreme Court is interpreting the Constitution and our Bill of Rights, and much of our Bill of Rights mirrors at times even word for word the English Bill of Rights, often the Supreme Court will look to, for example, Blackstone, and look to English common law for how these rights were understood hundreds of years before America existed. So that intertwined history is really important. And I do like the President Trump's pointing out, like, this is a great way to celebrate 250 years by reminding us of big things that matter. I'm going to say something else that surprised me. King Charles is funny.
And I was going to say, either he's funny or his speechwriters are unbelievable. It may be a combination of both. But both. But I also think, like, man, after seeing him, I liked him a lot more after watching this visit than I ever did before, just because I always thought he was a kind of a stiff, prim and proper, kind of, awkward guy. That is not how he came across on this trip at all. In fact, I remember when he came back when Bush was in office back in 2008. I think it was 2005 maybe when they made their visit, if I remember correctly, and that year could be wrong. But he didn't even have, and granted, he was not the king yet, so I think he was playing a role. But it's like he's now like, I am the guy, and he's way more funny than he was when he visited back then.
Yeah, look, I will say this past weekend, I was in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I was at talking about that 2005 visit, this last weekend, I was in Scottsdale, Arizona, the Hoover Institute had a gathering of its board of overseers and its top supporters, and they invited me to come speak Saturday night to the dinner. And what we did at the dinner is we did a fireside chat where Condi Rice interviewed me. And I've known Condi for 25 years, and Condi's remarkably capable.
I love Condi, by the way. She's so awesome.
She's phenomenal. And we had an hour-long discussion that was really deep and nuanced. But beforehand, Condi and I were chatting. And I mentioned to her that on Monday that I was going to go to this garden party, and I was excited to meet the king and queen. And she referenced that 2005 visit, and she said, "Oh yeah, when he came, she was Secretary of State at the time, and she said, well, I was the senior woman, so I was his escort." And I'm like, all right, I'm psyched to go to a garden party and meet him. And I'm like, you really Bigfooted me. You're like, I was his date. Okay, that would be one step up. But look, I will admit the humor, and it was very well written. It's very British dry humor.
Yeah.
But he delivered it very well. And I'm going to confess, I actually turned the senator next to me before the speech started, and I sort of wisecracked that he wasn't known to be the most riveting speaker. And he really surprised me. I was not expecting. Give a listen to some of the better jokes he had in his speech, because they were really well done.
As Oscar Wilde said, we have really everything in common with America nowadays, except, of course, language. Now, as you may know, when I address my own Parliament at Westminster, we still follow an age-old tradition and take a member of Parliament hostage, holding him or her at Buckingham Palace until I am safely returned. These days, we look after our guests rather well, to the point that they often do not want to leave. This is a city which symbolizes a period in our shared history, or what Charles Dickens might have called a tale of two Georges. The first president, George Washington, and my 5 times great-grandfather, King George III. King George, as you know, never set foot in America. And please rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, I am not here as part of some cunning rearguard action. 250 years ago, or as we say in the United Kingdom, just the other day.
I mean, there's some really good lines there. That one right there, the 250 years, or as we say, just the other day. Look, the speechwriters killed it, but he delivered the lines with a grin, and it was really, really, really fun to see him do that in such a fun way in front of Congress.
Well, I really like the "I'm not here" as some sort of cunning rearguard action. That made me laugh out loud, and actually when I just listened to it right now, it made me laugh out loud again. Like that was funny and delivered really well. And I'll tell you, for those of you who are not watching this on YouTube, if you watched it, you can see him. The joke about, as Dickens would have said, a tale of two Georges, that joke didn't quite land, and he sort of made this self-deprecating face. He acknowledged facially that
it didn't land. Yeah,
that it's a pun. It's a pun and his facial expression is what prompted a bigger laugh and then a round of applause. But it was that in particular, you had to see the expression to see how he made it. He made it a winner, and I was really happily surprised. Now, his speech was good enough that here's what President Trump had to say about the speech afterwards.
This is a great honor, and we welcome Their Majesties King Charles III and Queen Camilla of the United Kingdom to the White House. Very special place, very, very special. And I also want to, before we really begin, I want to congratulate Charles on having made a fantastic speech today at Congress. He got the Democrats to stand. I've never been able to do that. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. They liked him more than they've ever liked any Republican or Democrat.
I love that. Or Democrat, actually. Like that was one of the best lines. And it goes back to like what I said at the beginning. I'm like, didn't the Democratic Party just like spend an entire like several months screaming no kings and having no kings protests? And they gave him like a glowing standing ovation multiple times, loving the king being there more than they'd ever do for any Republican, that's for sure.
Well, the White House today tweeted out a picture of President Trump and King Charles just with the words "two kings," which drove the left out of their minds.
Yeah, that was good. Easy trolling right there.
Yeah, and I will say, King Charles also had another couple of jokes at the state dinner at the White House. Give a listen to these.
On this occasion, I cannot help noticing the readjustments to the East Wing, Mr. President, following your visit to Windsor Castle last year. And I'm sorry to say that we British, of course, made our own small attempt at real estate redevelopment of the White House in 1814.
I mean, that's a great line right there. Like the hit, whoever he hired, like I want to steal them and bring them here because they were brilliant jokes.
And by the way, for those of y'all who aren't students of history, in the War of 1812, the British burned the White House and like leveled it, and so that's. Look, I assume the king probably has a speechwriter on staff. But whether he used his normal speechwriter or brought in, it wouldn't surprise me if they actually brought in a comedy writer. I mean, there's
for sure.
Because there's, and what I like about the humor is it's the wry British humor. There's a dryness to it that just makes it really funny. But listen, I am glad that the king was here, and I am glad that both he and President Trump focused on the foundation of our culture, of our law, of our understanding that our rights come from God Almighty, that governments are instituted to secure those rights. That history, we've got this entire year, our 250th birthday, is going to be a lot of discussion of that, and I think the King's being here was an important part of that.
It really was. It was very cool. It was nice to see people come together and have this moment, especially after what we just had at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I want to move, Senator, on to another topic, and that is some good news for people that are sick and tired of seeing crimes committed in one actual action, especially when it comes to taxpayer dollars disappearing by the tens of billions. And now we have the FBI that has raided the Minneapolis fraud-ridden care centers, 20 plus of these that were actually raided by the FBI, including the famous Children's Leering Center that was supposed to say on their sign learning, but it was just the Leering Center. That one was raided as well. And I am excited to just say, at least it looks like now we're getting some real action into stopping this fraud and to showing that if you take away taxpayer dollars this way and you send it to terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab and you bribe Democrats to look the other way, like Governor Walz with campaign contributions, somebody is at least going to come in and actually hold you accountable.
Yes, look, I'm very glad that there is finally going to be some accountability. 22 locations in Minneapolis raided by the FBI this week. You mentioned the Quality Leering Center. Of course, their most proud graduate, Ilhan Omar, who actually is not technically a graduate.
We had World War 11 yesterday. Did you know about that? We've had 11 World Wars. That's impressive stuff. I didn't think the King of England knew that.
It really is stunning. So she was giving a speech, and the speech referenced World War II. But the 2 is 2 Roman numerals, and that's how you normally write World War II. Yes. And she read that as World War 11.
Yes. Now, and didn't correct herself, just owned it and kept going. Like, it was not like if you or I did that. And by the way, if you've ever read a speech and you're tired or you're just it's a long day, you might read something, but you immediately correct it. She had no clue, no idea.
Look, there's a level of ignorance there. If a ninth grader thought World War II was World War 11, you would flunk that ninth grader. I mean, you think about it.
Used to. Nowadays, we'll just socially just pass them on in our public school system. Back in the good old days, you'd fail.
Look, Ilhan Omar is one of the leading Democrats. She and AOC and, I mean, the crazy squad is driving the agenda of Democrats today. And the level of ignorance of basic world history is really stunning. And Omar was also integral in covering up the Somali fraud in Minnesota. She was a beneficiary of it. She was elected by the fraudsters. The Somali voting base is her core base. Their money helped elect her. Their votes did elect her. And she and Tim Walz and the governor and Keith Ellison, the AG, they were all absolutely involved in the cover-up. They had every incentive. It was corrupt. And we're talking over $9 billion of taxpayer money swindled away. And so here's what Fox News reported about the raids. Federal authorities raided more than 20 locations, including child care facilities in Minneapolis on Tuesday, as part of a sweeping fraud investigation into largely Somali-owned businesses, sources confirmed to Fox News. Quote, today, the FBI, with federal, state, and local law enforcement, is involved in court-authorized law enforcement activity as part of an ongoing fraud investigation, a Department of Justice spokesperson said. Authorities executed 22 federal search warrants in Minnesota on Tuesday morning as part of the operation, which is not immigration-related, sources said. The raids center on federal fraud investigations into largely Somali-owned businesses, including child care facilities that registered their daycare with the state, but were allegedly billing for care that was not provided. Sources told Fox News that 2 of the raids were conducted at the Quality Leering Center and Baby Halim No Child Care, both in Minneapolis. Vice President J.D. Vance addressed the raids in a post on X, writing, the task force of the DOJ will be relentless in exposing these fraudsters wherever they may be hiding. Governor Tim Walz, this is you want to talk about amazing chutzpah.
Yeah.
Said the raids were carried out by federal and state law enforcement after state agencies, quote, caught irregular behavior and reported it. Quote, if you commit fraud in Minnesota, you're going to get caught. And that's exactly what we saw today. We catch criminals when state and federal agencies share information. Joint investigations work, and securing justice depends upon it. Now, that truly is stunning because Walz, his entire governorship, has looked the other way on massive fraud, has refused to investigate it, has profited from it, has been elected by it, has taken campaign donations from it. The entire Democrat machinery was built on fraud, and now he's taking credit. That really is like the arsonist taking credit when the firefighters turn up and put out the fire.
Yeah, it really is. And it's all because now he's not running for re-election, right? So he can just be like, oh, we're rooting out fraud and try to, I guess, rebuild his legacy so maybe he can have a grand comeback one day. I don't know if that's going to work. There's one aspect of this, though, Senator, that excites me, and it's the fact that it's clear this is the beginning, not the end. Based on what was said by the DOJ, like this is the tip of the iceberg. We're going to the catalyst point. And then there's been directives at all states, including Republican-led states, to start looking at waste, fraud, and abuse. They're looking at California. I think you're going to see more people that are going to be indicted and more places that are going to be raided outside of Minnesota. That is exactly what the American people voted for, which was to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse.
That is exactly right. And I will point out also that other blue states are coming. California is coming. I have every reason to expect, and indeed I've been told by senior officials in the administration, California is even worse than Minneapolis has been. And I want you also to give a listen to Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins and what she revealed about fraud and abuse concerning SNAP, concerning food stamps. Give a listen to Secretary Rollins.
Yeah, this one's amazing, by the way. For context, this is about luxury cars and how many people on food stamps are driving like luxury cars. It's incredible.
Sharing. Previously, no data was shared. We had no idea where the taxpayer dollars were spent. Just one red state the recent dump of data, we found SNAP recipients had more than 2,000 Tesla owners, 200 Alfa Romeo owners, more than 144 that were receiving food stamps were driving Porsches. Again, this is the data dumps we're getting because before we had no accountability on any of these programs. We now are requiring accountability. The blue states are suing us. They don't want to share the data. And can you imagine, this was a red state where there is actually some taxpayer accountability. Imagine what's happening in the blue states if that's happening in the red states.
Well, I love that it's like a bunch of Tesla owners, Alfa Romeo, also Porsches, Mercedes, BMWs, and you're on food stamps. Like, these were high-end luxury cars.
Actually, Ben, it's even worse. So let me give some additional breakdown. Yeah. So there were 306 Land Rovers.
Those aren't cheap, by the way.
There were 59 Maseratis.
Yeah, that's a food stamp car. You know that.
There were 11 Lamborghinis. There were 3 Ferraris. And there were 3 Bentleys. These are people getting food stamps, driving a $250,000 or more. Like a Lamborghini could be $1 million car, depending on which one they had.
Yeah.
That is an absolute abuse. And if that happened in just one red state that handed over its data, how much do you think it's happening in Minnesota? How much do you think it's happening in New York? How much do you think it is happening in Illinois? How much do you think it's happening in California? The numbers are going to be stunning.
Every time they went after and got somebody there for fraud recently, what were they doing? You saw them putting in a 6-figure car that was being seized, and in some of the cases there was like multiple 6-figure cars that were being seized, Senator, and put on flatbeds. Like, they finally raided the house of this fraudster, and look at what they had. Like, if you're on food stamps and you're driving a Lambo or a Ferrari or a Maserati, like, you are defrauding the U.S. government, full stop.
Amen. Hallelujah. And listen, I'm very glad the Trump administration is having some accountability. Let me read from what the New York Post wrote about this story about Ferrari drivers on food stamps. So it's entitled Ferrari Drivers on Food Stamps, How States Help Scammers Game Welfare. New York Post. What do a university professor, a celebrity barber, and a professional football player have in common? All 3 bought new 6-figure luxury sports cars and lived lavish lifestyles while collecting food stamps. Wow. How on earth can these, quote, welfare recipients purchase high-end vehicles while remaining on the dole? Thanks to a federal loophole known as broad-based categorical eligibility. The Clinton administration manufactured this loophole, and the Obama administration supercharged it. Currently, 43 states and Washington, D.C. use broad-based categorical eligibility to bypass federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program eligibility limits on income, assets, or both. The mechanism, based on a federal law that was meant to minimize states' administrative costs, is simple. State welfare agencies print up a brochure about welfare programs or set up an informal hotline and deem it a, quote, benefit under the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. Anyone who touches that pamphlet, or receives the phone number, is then treated as being, quote, categorically eligible for food stamps.
Wow.
Even millionaires. It's fraud by design that distributes benefits intended for the truly needy to otherwise ineligible individuals under the insidious goal of maximizing enrollment and dependency, and it works in almost every state. Researchers from the Foundation for Government Accountability examined de-identified data on food stamp enrollment in a single representative state. The data set matched recipients with jobs, addresses, car registrations, and more, and then they redacted the personal details before the researchers reviewed. That's what produced these outcomes. And by the way, it also... thousands used Social Security numbers that federal databases could not verify. That included real numbers with mismatched names and birthdays, numbers issued years before the applicant's date of birth, numbers of people who died years ago, and numbers that don't even exist. All are clear signs.
And they still got him.
that both stolen identities and synthetic identities are being used to defraud the system. The BBCE loophole doesn't just expand enrollments, it creates the condition for outright criminals to flourish. When state agencies eliminate asset checks, they tear out the tripwires that cost fraudulent applications. This is, so a case in point, the wealthy professor, barber, and professional athlete that FGA researchers spotted could be victims of identity fraud because SNAP intentionally allows anything to serve as proof of identity, even a library card. If states were cross-checking income and assets, those cases would be flagged as potential fraud. Thousands more, here's something else, thousands more food stamp recipients in the study enrolled using IP addresses traced to foreign countries, including China, Mexico, and Canada. More than 5,000 applicants in this state used foreign-based email addresses to apply, and countless others used disposable emails, the kind designed for identity theft and phishing. Look, the USDA puts improper food stamp payments at $10.4 billion a year, with a B. That's more than $1 in every $10 spent on the program. And so now we're going after that fraud, and I'm here to say, yes, this is what I voted for. Holding the criminals accountable, and by the way, holding the Democrats accountable who have enabled this theft of taxpayer fraud. You want to know what the Democrats stand for? They stand for Somali fraudsters stealing your tax money and sending it to al-Shabaab, Islamist terrorists in Somalia. They stand for thieves driving Bentleys and Lamborghinis and Ferraris who say they need food stamps and stealing your money. That is, if the, and by the way, look, sometimes Heidi will say, gosh, you know, that rhetoric sounds really harsh. Well, Ben, if the Democrats don't stand for that, then I just want to ask you a question. Why wouldn't Democrat governors do what the Trump administration has done? Why wouldn't they go after and cut them off? And they don't do it because ideologically they are in favor of it. If they just said, I mean, is there one Democrat in the country who will say, all right, we're going to have a rule. Nobody on food stamps can have a Ferrari. Like if you have a Ferrari, sell your damn car.
Can't have food stamps. Yeah.
And buy your food with that money you get for selling your car. But you don't get, if you got the money for a Ferrari, we ain't paying for your food. I got to say, that sounds like common sense, and there's not a single Democrat governor in the country that's saying that.
Amen to that. Don't forget, we do the show Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Hit that subscribe or auto-download button. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. Share it on your social media pages, wherever you are on social media. And the Senator and I will see you back here on Friday morning.